Snow fell in heavy sheets, swallowing the city in silence. At the edge of the Kane estate, two iron gates rose like black teeth, gleaming cold under the security floodlights. Beyond them stretched a drive so long it disappeared into darkness, leading to a mansion that loomed like a castle carved from ice. And at those gates, half buried in snowdrifts, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Her braids were frayed, her coat 2 sizes too small, the buttons barely holding against the winter wind. In her hands, clutched so tightly her knuckles whitened, was a wrinkled envelope already spotted with damp flakes. Her lips trembled from cold, but she didn't move. 2 security guards shifted uncomfortably on the other side of the bars. "Kid, you can't be here," one barked, stamping his boots against the frost. "This is private property." The girl didn't flinch. She pressed her face close to the bars. "I'm not leaving until he reads this." The other guard snorted, exhaling steam. "Who?" "Mr. Kane. You think the boss has time to play pen pals with little kids off the street?" She held the envelope higher, her small hands shaking. "It's from my mother. She's dying. Please." The guards exchanged a glance. They'd seen their share of hustlers, scammers, charity beggars. Most didn't make it past the gates. But something about this girl, the ragged defiance in her eyes, the way her teeth chattered yet her grip on the letter never loosened, made even the hardened men pause. Still, their orders were clear. "Go home, kid. Before you freeze out here." Her lip quivered, but her feet didn't move. "I don't have a home." Inside the mansion, warmth glowed from chandeliers that spilled light over marble floors. Edward Kane sat alone at the head of a dining table built for 20, his plate half finished. He was a man carved from stone, late 50s, silver hair perfectly combed, jaw hard as granite. His wheelchair was angled slightly away from the table, his legs unmoving under the white linen. He was used to silence. For years, it had been his companion. Tonight, it was interrupted by the shuffle of boots. "Sir," one of the guards began carefully, "there's a situation at the gates." Edward didn't look up from his glass of wine. "Then handle it. That's why I pay you." "We tried, sir. But she, well, it's a little girl. Says she won't leave until you read her letter. Claims it's from her dying mother." The billionaire's laugh was short and sharp. "Do you think I read every sob story shoved through my gates? Tell her to join the line of orphans and beggars." The guard hesitated. "With respect, sir, she's different. She won't move. It's near a blizzard out there." Edward's glass clinked against the table as he set it down harder than he meant to. His patience was thin, and yet, something in the guard's voice, that note of unease, stirred a sliver of curiosity he didn't want to acknowledge. "Bring her in," he snapped. The foyer doors groaned open, letting in a gust of wind and a flurry of snow. The little girl was ushered inside, shivering violently, snow clinging to her braids and lashes. She looked impossibly small beneath the vaulted ceilings, her breath clouding the warm air as she held out the envelope like an offering. Edward's eyes narrowed. "So you're the brave little messenger." She nodded, lips pale, but her grip on the letter never faltered. "Please, sir. You have to read it. My mama said you're the only one who can." The guard stood awkwardly, waiting for dismissal. Edward waved them away, his attention locked on the girl. "You think I have time for children's fantasies?" His voice was dry, cruel in its indifference. "Do you know how many letters I receive every year, begging for money, spinning tales of tragedy?" The girl's eyes lifted to his, dark and unwavering. "This one isn't a lie." For the first time, Edward faltered. There was no waver in her tone, no theatrics, just a steady, stubborn truth in a child's voice that pierced deeper than any adult's plea could. For a long moment, the room was silent save for the crackle of the fireplace. Finally, Edward's hand extended, slow and deliberate. The envelope trembled as he took it from her grasp. The paper was thin, soft at the edges, written in a hand he hadn't seen in decades, but instantly recognized. His breath caught. The girl stood before him, waiting, her eyes wide and unblinking. Edward Kane, cold, untouchable billionaire, paralyzed titan of industry, stared down at the letter that suddenly weighed more than all his fortune. His lips curled into a bitter, mocking smile, masking the tremor in his chest. "Well then, let's see what fantasy your mother has spun." He tore open the flap. The camera lingers on his face as his eyes scan the first words. Shock flickers across his features. Anger. Confusion. Then something softer, something dangerously close to pain. But we never see the words. Not yet. The screen fades on the image of Edward Kane frozen in his chair, the little girl watching, and the letter trembling in his hand. The impossible promise hangs in the air like a storm about to break. Edward Kane sat frozen with the letter in his hand, but instead of tearing through its contents, his eyes drifted toward the flames in the massive stone hearth. The girl's stubborn gaze lingered, yet his mind slipped backward, years into the past, to the moment when everything began to unravel. 2 decades ago, Edward Kane had been more than a businessman. He had been a lion, feared and respected across boardrooms, turning every negotiation into conquest. Towers of steel and glass bore his name in cities around the world. His fortune was boundless, his confidence unshakable. But all empires, even gilded ones, are fragile. One night, beneath the glow of city lights, his driver lost control. The car spun, metal shrieked, glass shattered. When Edward woke in the hospital, he was greeted not by his empire, not by his wife, but by doctors shaking their heads. His legs would never carry him again. The wife who had once clung to him through victory began to drift. Within a year, she was gone, her farewell note cutting colder than the accident itself. "I didn't marry a man in a chair." From then on, Edward withdrew into his mansion. Meetings were held by video calls. Assistants carried out orders like soldiers. He poured his fortune into walls, guards, and silence. He still had money, still had power, but joy. Family. Laughter. Those were luxuries he'd long buried. The world saw a billionaire. Edward saw a prisoner in a cage made of marble. Across the city, life looked very different. Amara lived in a small, crumbling apartment on the 5th floor of a building that smelled of mildew and broken promises. The ceiling leaked when it rained, the heat rarely worked in winter, and the sound of sirens lulled her to sleep more often than lullabies. Her mother, Lena, once had dreams of becoming a nurse. Life, however, had dealt her a cruel hand. Sickness crept into her body, leaving her weaker by the week. Medication was expensive, jobs scarce, and so Lena worked what shifts she could, coughing through the night as she stitched clothes for pennies. But Amara never saw her mother as weak. To her, Lena was light itself, smiling through pain, humming old songs, whispering bedtime stories even when her voice trembled. "Courage isn't being strong all the time," her mother once told her. "It's standing tall even when you feel small." And so Amara learned to stand tall. She learned to cook with scraps, to walk to school with worn shoes, to smile even when classmates sneered. She carried her mother's love like armor. But when Lena's illness grew worse, when the coughing racked her body and blood stained her lips, Amara felt helpless for the first time. Until her mother pressed a letter into her hands. "Find him," Lena whispered, her hand trembling. "Find Edward Kane. He must know the truth before I'm gone." "Who is he, Mama?" Her mother's eyes glistened. "The man who once held my heart. The man who might be your father." Amara didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. Her mother's last wish was clear: deliver the letter, no matter the cost. And so she had trudged through snow, clutching the envelope with frozen fingers, standing at the gates of a man who had no reason to open them. Back in the mansion, Edward's gaze drifted to the girl. She stood in his foyer, leaving little puddles of melted snow on his marble floor, her tiny shoulders squared against the grandeur that tried to swallow her. She had no idea how out of place she looked, or maybe she did and simply didn't care. Edward sneered. "Do you know who I am?" Amara nodded. "My mama says you're Edward Kane. She said once, you loved her." The name burned on his tongue. Lena. Memories stirred, fragments of laughter in a cramped diner booth, late-night walks when he still lived like a man instead of a god. A pair of brown eyes shining with warmth. He had buried those memories long ago, beneath money and regret. Yet here they were, returned in the form of a child. "This letter," Edward muttered, holding it up, "do you even know what's inside?" Amara shook her head. "Mama said it was for you, not me." Her words struck him harder than expected. For him. Specifically for him. The billionaire who thought he had severed every tie to his past now found himself tethered again, by a dying woman's words and a child's courage. Edward's laughter was bitter, almost cruel. "Do you think one piece of paper can change 20 years? Do you think a dying woman's fairy tale will make me forget who I am?" Amara didn't blink. "I think the truth is in that letter. And I think you're afraid of it." The room fell silent. For the first time in decades, someone had dared to stand against Edward Kane. Not a board member, not a rival billionaire, but a child in a threadbare coat. He should have been angry. Instead, he felt unsettled. The fire crackled, and Edward tightened his grip on the envelope. His fingers trembled, though he refused to let the girl see. He could toss it into the flames, let it burn, end this nonsense here and now. Or he could read it. He hated that the choice felt heavier than any deal he'd ever signed. The letter lay in his lap, its weight pressing like judgment. And though he had not yet unfolded the paper, Edward Kane already knew, his life would never be the same again. The mansion had never felt so quiet. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to hush, waiting. Edward Kane sat rigid in his chair, the letter trembling faintly in his hand. Across from him, the little girl, Amara, stood still, her boots dripping melted snow onto the marble, her gaze locked on him with a determination far too large for her tiny frame. For a long time, he didn't move. His eyes traced the handwriting scrawled on the envelope. He knew it. He hated that he knew it. Finally, with a grunt, Edward tore it open. The paper inside was thin, fragile, as though it might crumble under the weight of his hands. He unfolded it slowly, forcing his eyes across the first line. "Edward, if you're reading this, then my time is almost gone." The words sliced through him. His throat constricted. He read on. "I never wanted to leave this world without telling you the truth. Years ago, when we were young and foolish, before you became who you are now, we shared something real. You left me behind when ambition carried you away, but you didn't leave me alone. You left me with a piece of you." Edward's breath caught. His eyes darted up, searching Amara's face. The child waited, silent, her small fists clenched at her sides. He forced himself to continue. "Her name is Amara. She is strong, stubborn, and full of light, the best parts of both of us. She deserves more than the life I've been able to give her. I'm sick now, Edward. Dying. She'll have no one when I'm gone. Please, if you ever loved me, even for a moment, do not let her face this world alone." The paper shook violently now, though his grip was iron. He read the last words, written in a hand that faltered but still carried love. "She is your daughter. Take care of her." Edward slammed the letter down on the armrest of his chair, his jaw locked. His pulse thundered in his ears. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No. This is a trick. A cruel, desperate trick." Amara's eyes widened. "It's not. Mama said it's the truth." His laugh was bitter, hollow. "Do you know how many women claim that? Do you know how many letters I've received over the years from people wanting a piece of me? Her chin lifted, trembling but defiant. Mama never lied to me. Not once. Her words pierced deeper than he wanted them to. Edward wheeled his chair back sharply, distancing himself as though proximity itself might trap him. You expect me to believe that after 20 years, Lena suddenly decides to drop a child at my doorstep? His voice was sharp, cutting. Why now? Why wait until she's dying? Amara's lip quivered, but she held her ground. Because she didn't want anything from you. Only for me. Only for you to know. The words hit him like stones. His breath came faster, his chest tight. He could almost see Lena's eyes in the girl's face, dark, unyielding, burning with truth. No, he whispered again, though it sounded less certain this time. The room grew unbearably heavy. Amara took a small step closer, clutching the hem of her coat. Please, she said softly. Mama's dying. I don't have anywhere else to go. You don't have to believe me now, but at least don't send me away. Edward Kane, who had turned away kings and presidents, who had slammed doors on enemies and so-called friends alike, found himself unable to speak. The letter lay on his lap, its words seared into his mind. She is your daughter. Every instinct screamed to reject it. To call his lawyer, his doctor, his security, anyone to remove this child and her claims from his perfect fortress of solitude. And yet, when he looked at her, he couldn't. Because behind the stubborn set of her chin, behind the frost clinging to her lashes, he saw a flicker of something that made him ache. Lena. The Lena he had loved, long before power hardened him into stone. Edward closed his eyes, exhaling raggedly. Damn you, Lena, he muttered under his breath. When he opened them again, Amara was still there. Waiting. Unblinking. Finally, he gestured with a sharp jerk of his head. Fine. You can stay, for tonight. But don't think for a second this means I believe your fairy tale. Amara's eyes shimmered with relief, though she didn't smile. She only nodded, clutching her coat tighter around her small frame. Edward turned his chair toward the fire, but his hand lingered on the letter. He couldn't throw it away. Couldn't burn it. Couldn't forget it. The words echoed, relentless, she is your daughter. The next morning, Edward Kane expected the child to be gone. Surely, she would have slipped away in the night, back to whatever world she had crawled from. But when he wheeled into the grand kitchen, there she was, perched on a stool far too big for her, swinging her legs as she nibbled toast. The cook stood awkwardly nearby, clearly torn between irritation and sympathy. She insisted she was staying, sir. Said you, allowed it. Edward frowned. The letter still lay folded on his desk upstairs, burning in his mind like a coal he couldn't extinguish. You think this is a hotel? He asked sharply, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Amara looked up, crumbs dotting her lips. No. Hotels don't feel this empty. The cook choked on a laugh and quickly disguised it as a cough. Edward's glare silenced him, but the damage was done. The child had a tongue sharper than he expected. For hours, Edward tried to go about his usual routine, calls with advisors, endless documents read from the study, meetings piped through screens. Yet wherever he turned, the girl was there. She wandered the halls, running her small fingers along the polished banisters, peering into portraits of ancestors she didn't know, poking her head into rooms filled with furniture worth more than her entire neighborhood. Do you live here all alone? She asked suddenly, startling him in the library. Yes, Edward muttered without looking up. Her head tilted. Don't you get lonely? No. You're lying. His jaw tightened. Few men had ever dared accuse him of lies. This slip of a child did it without hesitation. That night, Edward wheeled himself into the drawing room, intending to brood by the fire with a glass of wine. Instead, he found Amara seated at the grand piano, her tiny hands pressing random keys. The sound was clumsy but cheerful. "Don't touch that," Edward snapped. "It's worth more than you can imagine." She looked over her shoulder, unbothered. "It's sad when things are worth more than people." His chest tightened at the words. She turned back, pressing a tentative melody, broken, uneven, but hauntingly similar to something he hadn't heard in years. He froze. "Where did you learn that?" he demanded. "Mama hums it. She said it was your song." The room tilted around him. He hadn't touched that melody since Lena left. He had written it at 21, played it for her under cheap cafe lights. And here, decades later, her child plucked it from memory. For the first time in years, Edward Kane felt tears sting his eyes. He turned his chair sharply and left the room, hiding from her gaze. Over the next days, she dismantled his fortress of solitude piece by piece. She insisted on joining his meals, filling the silence with chatter about school, about books she loved, about the way snowflakes look like stars if you squinted. She explored the gardens, tugging his chair along the paths, scolding him when he complained of the cold. She placed drawings on his desk, scribbles of him standing tall, holding her hand. Each time, Edward grumbled. Each time, the grumble grew softer. One evening, as she laughed at her own joke, something strange happened. Edward laughed too. A deep, rusty sound that startled them both. Amara's eyes widened. "You sound nicer when you laugh." He glared half-heartedly. "Don't get used to it." But she already had. One morning, Edward awoke to a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. A faint tingling in his legs. At first, he dismissed it as imagination. But when he tried to shift, he swore he felt the brush of sheets against his calves. His breath caught. He told no one. Not yet. But deep inside, a spark lit. Later that day, Amara tugged at his hand, urging him into the garden. "Come on. Mama says the sun is medicine." He allowed her to drag his chair into the weak winter light. She spun around him, giggling as she caught snowflakes on her tongue. For a moment, Edward forgot his fortune, his failures, his fortress. For a moment, he saw the world as she did, simple, bright, alive. At night, when the mansion grew quiet, Edward found himself lingering by the door of the guest room where Amara slept. He would listen to her soft breathing, the faint hum of a lullaby she carried from her mother. Something shifted in him, something he couldn't name. The walls he had built, walls of money, bitterness, solitude, began to crack. The letter upstairs still haunted him. But the girl downstairs was changing him faster than he could resist. The Kane mansion had never seen so much laughter. Not in years. But word travels fast, even through iron gates and stone walls. The first ripple of trouble came from within. Vanessa strolled into the mansion one evening, her heels clicking sharply against marble. She was half Edward's age, polished and glamorous, a socialite who thrived on appearances. She stopped cold when she spotted Amara curled on the couch, drawing with crayons. "What is this?" Vanessa's voice dripped disdain. Edward looked up from his chair, bracing himself. "This is Amara." The girl glanced up shyly, offering a small wave. Vanessa's lips curled. "Since when do we run a daycare?" Edward's tone was flat. "She's staying here." "With you?" "Edward, do you realize what people will say? A strange child suddenly living in your home? Do you have any idea how this looks?" He bristled, but before he could respond, Amara spoke softly. "It looks like he isn't lonely anymore." The room fell silent. Edward's jaw tightened. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "This is ridiculous. She's not your responsibility." Edward's hand clenched on the armrest. "For now, she is." Vanessa stormed out, heels striking like gunfire. It didn't take long for whispers to spread among the house staff. "She's a scam," the maid muttered in the kitchen. "Her mother's playing him." I heard she told Mr. Kane she's his daughter, another scoffed. Sophia, the housekeeper who had served Edward faithfully for 15 years, shook her head. I've seen her eyes. That child believes every word. And Mr. Kane. I've never seen him smile like that. But doubt was contagious. Even Sophia's voice carried worry. A week later, headlines exploded. Billionaire recluse harboring mystery child. Is Edward Kane the secret father of a street girl? Heirs in danger. Fortune at stake. Reporters swarmed the gates. Cameras flashed. Microphones shoved through bars. Edward's phone buzzed endlessly, lawyers demanding answers, business partners warning of scandals, board members furious at the distraction. In one meeting, his chief financial officer slammed a newspaper onto the desk. Edward, this is madness. The press is circling like sharks. Investors are panicking. We need a statement. Edward's voice was steel. There will be no statement. You can't ignore this. A child shows up claiming to be your daughter. People will assume the worst. Edward's eyes narrowed. Let them assume. But inside, he felt the walls closing in. At a charity gala, Edward wheeled into a ballroom filled with glittering elites. Whispers followed him like shadows. That's the child they're talking about, isn't it? Imagine, him, a father. Or maybe just another scheme to soften his image. Edward ignored them, but the sting was real. He had been many things in his life, powerful, feared, respected. Never pitied. Never doubted. Now, everywhere he turned, he saw suspicion. One evening, Edward found Amara sitting on the staircase, her eyes red from crying. What is it? He asked gruffly. She sniffled. The maids, they said I'm here to steal from you. They said Mama's lying. Edward's chest tightened. He rolled closer, lowering his voice. Listen to me. What other people say doesn't matter. Do you understand? Her lip trembled. But what if they're right? What if you think I'm lying too? He froze. For a long moment, he couldn't answer. He thought of the letter, of Lena's words seared into his memory. She is your daughter. Slowly, Edward reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly before resting on hers. I don't know what I think yet, he admitted. But I know this, you're not leaving. Not until I have answers. And not until you're safe. Her small fingers squeezed his. For the first time in years, Edward felt the weight of responsibility that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with love. The storm outside the mansion grew louder. Protesters appeared at the gates, some chanting in support, others calling Amara a fraud. Television anchors debated his every move. Is this billionaire the victim of a scam, or a father finally facing the truth? Public sympathy is turning. If this child is his, why did he hide her? Edward watched the screens in silence, rage burning in his chest. It wasn't just his reputation on the line anymore, it was hers. Amara. She had come with nothing but a letter and a dying mother's wish. And now the world was tearing her apart. Edward clenched his fists. He had spent decades hiding from the world, building walls no one could scale. But somehow, this child had breached them, and now the world was punishing her for it. Late one night, Vanessa returned, her eyes blazing. Enough, Edward. This has to end. Send her back where she came from before this ruins you. Edward's voice was cold. I won't throw a child onto the street. She isn't your child. Vanessa snapped. She's a story. A lie. You're being played. Don't you see that? Edward's hands gripped his wheels so tightly his knuckles whitened. You think I can't tell when I'm being played? That girl, she looks at me and I see Lena. I see truth. Vanessa's lips curled into a sneer. Then you're a fool. Then I'll be a fool, Edward growled. For the first time, Vanessa saw it, the immovable man she could never control. And in that moment, she knew she was losing him. That night, as Amara slept peacefully for once, Edward sat in his study, staring at the letter again. The world was against them. The media screamed, the staff whispered, the elites sneered. Even his closest allies doubted him. But one thing was certain, the girl was here, and she wasn't leaving. And Edward Kane, who once thought nothing could shake him, now felt the weight of a choice that could change everything. The storm outside the Kane mansion raged on, headlines, whispers, protests, but inside, something fragile and unexpected was taking root. One afternoon, Amara dragged Edward back into the drawing room where the grand piano sat gathering dust. "Play it again," she begged. Edward scowled. "I told you, I don't." She crossed her arms, imitating his stern tone. "Don't make excuses." For the first time in years, Edward's hands hovered over the keys. He pressed one, then another. At first the sound was broken, uneven. Then slowly, a melody emerged, the same tune he had once written for Lena. Amara clapped her hands, her face glowing. "See? You still remember." His chest tightened. For a moment, he wasn't Edward Kane the billionaire. He was a young man again, playing for a woman who had believed in him before the world did. And this child, her child, was bringing it back. Days later, Edward woke to the sensation again, a tingling in his legs. This time stronger, undeniable. He tried shifting, and for the first time in 20 years, his right foot twitched beneath the blanket. His breath caught. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But the spark of hope lodged itself deep in his chest. When Amara tugged him outside that morning, urging him to try standing, he snapped, "Don't be ridiculous." But her laughter was fearless. Miracles take time. But they always show up. Her faith unnerved him, and yet, it fed something he hadn't let himself feel in decades, belief. At last, Amara begged to see her mother. Edward resisted, fearful of the chaos it might cause, but finally relented. They drove to the hospital in his black car, reporters shouting as cameras flashed. Edward shielded Amara as best he could, his jaw hard as stone. Inside, the sterile smell hit him. He froze at the doorway of the hospital room. On the bed lay Lena, frail, pale, her beauty dimmed but not extinguished. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on Edward. "You came," she whispered. Edward's breath caught. He had faced boardrooms, court battles, scandals, but nothing had ever terrified him like seeing Lena again. "I read the letter," he said hoarsely. Her lips curved faintly. "Then you know." He looked at Amara, then back at her. Words failed him. Amara climbed onto the bed, curling beside her mother. "He's helping, Mama. He's trying." Edward swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to deny it, to hold on to his armor. But the truth was harder to bury here, in this fragile room. Back at the mansion, Edward ordered the inevitable, a DNA test. "We'll have answers," he told Amara sternly. She tilted her head. "Answers are good. But I already know." Her certainty unnerved him. He wanted proof. She wanted faith. The test was sent. Results pending. The waiting began. While the test lingered in labs, life inside the mansion transformed. Amara filled the halls with drawings, pinning them to cold stone walls. She cooked with the kitchen staff, giggling as flour dusted her braids. She played hide-and-seek among antique furniture that had never known joy. And Edward, despite himself, laughed. He even joined, badly, stiffly, but enough to make Amara squeal in delight. For the first time in decades, the Kane mansion felt alive. One evening during a power outage, the mansion sat bathed in candlelight. Amara insisted they sit together, telling ghost stories. Edward smirked at her feeble attempts. That's not scary. She leaned closer, her eyes gleaming. You know what is scary? Being alone forever. The words sliced through him. His laughter died. But then she grinned, reaching for his hand. Good thing you're not alone anymore. Edward froze, staring at her tiny fingers wrapped around his. The silence in the room shifted. For years, he had drowned in emptiness. But in this moment, with this child by his side, he felt something he thought was gone forever. Home. The next morning, Edward stood by his bedroom window, the letter still on his desk, the test results still days away. He placed his hand on the glass, his legs tingling again, stronger this time. Below in the garden, Amara twirled in the snow, her laughter rising to him like a promise. For the first time, Edward allowed himself to wonder, what if Lena was telling the truth? What if this really is my daughter? The possibility, once terrifying, now filled him with a warmth he could no longer deny. But outside the gates, the storm was gathering, waiting to crush the fragile miracle inside. The envelope sat unopened on Edward's desk. Not the one Lena had sent, but a new one, stark white, stamped with the seal of the DNA lab. For days, Edward had felt the spark of hope grow. The laughter, the tingling in his legs, the way Amara filled his halls with warmth, it all whispered one truth: she was his. She had to be. But as his hands trembled over the flap, he feared otherwise. Amara stood at his side, her wide eyes locked on the envelope. Go on, she whispered. Read it. Edward inhaled sharply, tore the seal, and unfolded the papers. His eyes scanned the words. His chest hollowed. Result, paternity not established. Silence. Amara tilted her head, not understanding. What does it say? Edward's voice cracked, harsher than he intended. It says, you're not mine. The color drained from her face. She stumbled back, shaking her head. No. That's wrong. Mama wouldn't. Edward's voice rose, fueled by anger he didn't know where to place. Do you think I'm a fool? That I let you into my home, my life, for this lie? Amara flinched as though struck. I didn't lie. The door burst open. Vanessa strode in, smirking triumphantly, the papers snatched from Edward's lap before he could stop her. Well, she purred, waving the results. There's your proof. I told you this little charity case was a scam. Edward clenched his fists, shame and fury twisting inside him. Shame that he had believed. Fury that he cared. Get her out, he muttered, voice like ice. Amara's lips quivered. Please, Mr. Edward. Please don't. Out. His roar shook the room. The guards entered, hesitant but obedient. Amara's sobs echoed through the halls as she was led away. Her final words before the doors slammed shut, I'm not lying. You are my father. News traveled fast. By the next day, the media screamed headlines. DNA test exposes fraud, child not Kane's daughter. Billionaire's fortune safe from scam. Reporters celebrated the downfall of a fairy tale. At the hospital, Lena saw the papers. Her fragile body trembled as she read the words, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, she whispered, clutching the sheets. It's not true. Edward, he has to believe me. Her heart monitor beeped faster. Nurses rushed in. Amara clung to her mother's hand, sobbing. I told him, Mama. I told him, but he doesn't believe us. Lena's voice cracked. Then you must make him. Promise me, Amara. I promise. Back at the mansion, Sophia, the housekeeper who had been Edward's most loyal confidant, approached him, her face heavy with disappointment. I told you, sir, she said softly. This child and her mother saw your weakness. They used it. And you let them. Edward glared at her, but the weight of the words crushed him. "Get out, Sophia." Her eyes widened. "Edward." "Out," he thundered. Her departure left the mansion colder than ever. The halls that had once rung with laughter fell silent. The piano sat untouched, the drawings on the walls ripped down. Edward wheeled himself to his study each night, staring at the DNA results, the ink mocking him. Not established. The tingling in his legs faded. Or perhaps he no longer noticed. What was the point? The spark Amara had lit was gone, smothered beneath betrayal and doubt. He told himself he had been right all along, hope was a lie, love was a weakness, miracles were illusions. But even as he whispered it, he didn't believe it. Days later, as a blizzard swept the city, Edward heard faint pounding on the gates. Through his security cameras, he saw her, Amara, clutching the bars, snow whipping her small frame. "Please," her voice carried faintly through the intercom. "Please, listen to me. Mama's dying." Edward's finger hovered over the call button. His chest ached, his throat burned. But he turned the feed off. He couldn't look. That night, Edward sat alone before the fire, the letter from Lena in one hand, the DNA results in the other. Two truths at war, tearing him apart. He thought of Lena's eyes, the way she once looked at him as though he was more than ambition. He thought of Amara's laughter, her stubborn faith. But the world, the staff, the media, even his own reason, shouted louder. He hurled the letter into the fire. The flames devoured it, curling the paper into ash. For the first time in 20 years, Edward Kane wept. Not for his legs. Not for his loneliness. But for the little girl who had believed in him when he no longer could, whom he had cast out into the storm. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, their breath misting in the cold air, cameras flashing like lightning. Headlines blared across every channel. Fraud exposed, child's false claim against billionaire. Edward Kane speaks out in court today. Edward wheeled up the ramp, his face grim, jaw clenched. Inside, the gallery buzzed with anticipation. On one side, Vanessa sat with his lawyers, her smile razor-sharp. On the other, Amara clung to her mother's frail hand. Lena looked pale as parchment, her body trembling under a hospital blanket they had wheeled her in with. The judge struck the gavel. Order. We are here today to resolve allegations of fraud, inheritance disputes, and public scandal concerning Mr. Edward Kane. The prosecutor rose first, striding across the floor. This child and her mother fabricated claims of paternity. They sought to exploit a vulnerable man for his fortune. The DNA test proves it, Mr. Kane is not the father. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Vanessa leaned back, smirking. Edward sat stone still, his knuckles white. Then Amara was called forward. She stood on tiptoe at the witness stand, clutching the edge as if it were the only solid thing in the world. Her voice was small but steady. "I didn't come for money," she said. "I didn't even want to live here. I came because Mama said Mr. Kane deserved to know the truth. I just wanted him to read her letter." The gallery fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Tears slipped down Amara's cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "I don't care what the paper says. He is my father. I know it." Her words hung in the air like a bell tolling. Vanessa shot to her feet. Lies. Emotional manipulation. She slammed a folder onto the table. "The lab results are conclusive." But just then, Edward's lawyer rose, holding up another envelope. His voice cut through the tension. "Your Honor, we request permission to submit new evidence." The judge frowned. "Explain." The lawyer unfolded the document, his eyes gleaming. "This is a certified statement from the DNA lab. It confirms that the first test was tampered with. The chain of custody was broken. The results are invalid. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. The judge hammered his gavel. Order. Vanessa's face drained of color. And further, the lawyer continued, pulling another paper free, a retest has been completed under court supervision. The results are clear. Edward Kane is the biological father of Amara. The room exploded. Lena sobbed, clutching Amara's hand. Reporters shouted over one another, flashes blinding. Vanessa shrieked, lunging for the papers. This is impossible. Edward's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through her hysteria. Enough. The gallery froze. He wheeled forward slowly, then braced his trembling hands on the armrests. His legs tingled, stronger now, surging with life. With effort that made his whole body quake, Edward pushed. And stood. The room gasped as one. People rose to their feet. Cameras flashed like fireworks. For the first time in 20 years, Edward Kane stood tall, shaky but undeniable, his eyes blazing with fire. He turned to the judge, his voice steady despite the tears in his throat. This child is my daughter. This woman, he looked to Lena, was the only person who ever loved me before the world knew my name. I failed them once. I will not fail them again. Vanessa tried to speak, but the crowd drowned her out with jeers. Security moved in, guiding her from the courtroom as her protests dissolved into rage. Edward turned, extending a hand to Amara. She ran into his arms, burying her face against him. He held her close, his body shaking, but his heart stronger than it had ever been. The judge's voice boomed over the chaos. Then let the record show, Edward Kane acknowledges paternity. Custody granted. Case dismissed. The gavel struck. The courtroom thundered with applause, tears, disbelief. Edward looked down at Amara, who gazed up at him with eyes full of certainty. You see, she whispered. I told you. And Edward Kane, once a broken man bound to a chair and a fortress of bitterness, smiled through tears as he whispered back. Yes, my daughter. You did. The courtroom emptied slowly, reporters scrambling to send headlines that would circle the globe within minutes. Billionaire stands after 20 years. Edward Kane confirms daughter in stunning court reveal. From scandal to miracle, the little girl who changed everything. But inside those echoing walls, time seemed to stop. Edward still stood, shaky but firm, his hand clutching Amara's as though letting go might undo the miracle. Lena sat in her wheelchair, tears spilling freely, her frail hands pressed to her lips. For weeks, her body had been fading, but in that moment, her eyes burned with life. You see, she whispered hoarsely. I told you he would come back. Edward moved toward her slowly, each step unsteady but undeniable. The gallery hushed, watching in awe. He lowered himself carefully, kneeling awkwardly before Lena. I should have been there, he said, his voice breaking. I should never have left you. I was a coward. I buried myself in money and walls because I couldn't face the truth of what I lost. But you gave me something I never deserved. He reached for her hand, pressing it to his cheek. You gave me her. Lena sobbed, her frail body trembling. Take care of her, Edward. Promise me. He nodded fiercely. With everything I am. Amara squeezed both their hands, her tears sparkling with joy. See, Mama. We're a family now. News of the courtroom scene spread like wildfire. Overnight, the world shifted its gaze. The man they had mocked as a fool, the child they had called a scam, now they were symbols of hope. Crowds gathered outside the Kane mansion, not with jeers but with cheers. Strangers left flowers at the gates. Letters poured in, thanking Amara for proving that miracles still existed. For Edward, the greatest miracle wasn't that he stood, it was that he finally lived. He no longer wheeled himself silently through empty halls. Instead, he walked, slowly but proudly, alongside his daughter. The mansion transformed. Where silence once reigned, laughter now echoed. The piano sang again. The staff who had doubted now watched in awe as Edward softened, as Amara brought color back to the walls. Even Sophia, the housekeeper who had left in anger, returned one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "I was wrong," she whispered. Edward embraced her without hesitation. "So was I." For the first time in years, forgiveness filled the Kane estate. Weeks later, Lena's condition worsened. The doctors knew her time was near. Edward and Amara spent every moment at her side. Edward read to her, played piano softly in the corner. Amara curled against her mother, whispering stories and laughter. One evening, as the sunset bathed the hospital room in gold, Lena looked at Edward and Amara, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "Promise me you'll keep laughing," she whispered. Edward choked back tears. "We will." Her gaze lingered on Amara. "You were always my miracle. Now, you're his too." With that, her eyes closed peacefully, her hand slipping into Edward's as the monitors fell silent. Amara sobbed into her father's chest, and Edward held her tightly, vowing silently that her mother's final wish would never be broken. In the days that followed, Edward made a decision. He stood before the cameras outside his mansion, Amara's small hand in his. His voice, once cold and sharp, now rang with conviction. "I spent 20 years locked away, convinced that miracles were for other people. Then a little girl showed up at my gates with a letter. She didn't just heal me, she saved me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure her faith was not in vain." The crowd erupted. Headlines hailed the transformation. Edward Kane, once a symbol of greed and solitude, had become a symbol of redemption. And Amara, the child who refused to give up, became a beacon of hope for millions. The seasons turned. Snow melted into spring, and with it, the Kane mansion transformed. Once a fortress of stone and silence, it now pulsed with life. Children's laughter spilled from the garden. The iron gates, once symbols of separation, now opened wide to welcome families, charities, and neighbors who had once whispered in scorn. Edward had made a decision in Lena's memory: the mansion would no longer be a tomb. It would be a home for healing, a refuge for children who, like Amara, had once stood on the outside looking in. A banner stretched across the gates. "The Lena Foundation, a place for hope." Reporters covered the opening day, their cameras capturing a scene no one thought possible. Edward Kane, the man who had spent decades hiding in bitterness, stood tall, shaky but determined, at the entrance, his hand resting proudly on Amara's shoulder. "She saved me," he told the crowd. "Now I want this place to save others." Applause erupted. For once, the headlines weren't about scandal or wealth, they were about redemption. For Amara, life had changed forever. No longer a child clutching a wrinkled letter at iron gates, she now moved freely through halls filled with warmth. Her drawings lined the mansion walls, not hidden in corners but celebrated as art. She played piano alongside Edward, filling rooms with music that seemed to carry Lena's spirit in every note. And though grief still lingered, Amara found joy in knowing her mother's final wish had come true. She wasn't alone. Edward's business empire still thrived, but it no longer consumed him. Board meetings now ended early so he could be home for dinner. Deals were struck not for greed but for good: partnerships with hospitals, scholarships for underprivileged children, funding for research into paralysis and chronic illness. He had been a man who once measured worth in dollars. Now, he measured it in smiles. Sophia, the housekeeper, often watched him quietly, shaking her head in wonder. "I thought I knew you, sir. But it seems we're all meeting you for the first time." Edward smiled faintly. "Perhaps I'm meeting myself for the first time too." One evening, Edward and Amara sat at the grand piano. The sun dipped low, painting the room in soft orange light. Edward began to play the melody Lena had once loved. Amara joined in, her small hand striking keys with eager rhythm. When the last note faded, Edward looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. Your mother gave me back my heart. And you gave me back my life. Amara leaned against him, whispering, and you gave me a family. The camera pans out, showing the mansion lit with warm golden light, laughter spilling into the night. Edward's voiceover closes the story. I thought my fortune would protect me from pain. But it only built walls that kept love out. It took a little girl with nothing but a letter to show me the truth, love is the only wealth worth keeping. And when you open your heart, miracles will walk right through your gates. The screen fades to black as Amara's laughter echoes one last time.